Hello, and welcome to the Three Links Oddcast, your podcast for all things having to do with Odd Fellowship. And now, here are your hosts. Welcome, everybody, to the Three Links Oddcast. I'm one of your co-hosts, Toby Hansen.
I'm one of your other co-hosts, Ainsley Heilich, and we are joined today yet again with our extra special guest host, Christopher McHale.
No one has ever called me special in my life, ever.
Now, that's not true. Ainsley called you special 2 episodes ago.
I called you extra special tonight.
You and your steel trap of a memory.
I know.
Speaking of steel traps, do not let your bathtub be a steel trap for your stink, right?
That's right. And how can our listeners do that, brother? Please tell us.
I know you're on the edge of your seat, and I'm going to tell you right now. Pig and a Pug bath stuff. They are based in Missoula, Montana. You're going to get friendly service, probably a decent story to tell afterwards. And not only that, you're going to get soap that smells fantastic. They make a whole bunch of other stuff, candles, whatever. Look them up, Pig and a Pug bath stuff. They're online. They're everywhere.
That's right. Facebook, Etsy, just go to your search engine of choice, look up Pig and a Pug bath stuff, and they make some really fantastic soaps and bath bombs and other products like that.
I was very impressed by the zombie soaps that were just released.
Dead.
The Washing Dead.
You also get whimsically named products too, which is really, the name of it is half the fun.
So big thanks to Pig and a Pug. They help us pay for the distribution of this podcast, which is listened to by all of you wonderful Oddfellows and Rebeccas out there, all of you great listeners who are tuning in to find out the latest news in Odd Fellowship. And we happen to have the latest news. I'm going to start by introducing our guests. We have Sister Pearlie Stewart, who is the Grand Scribe of the Grand Encampment of Oregon, and also the newly elected Grand Warden of the Grand Lodge of Oregon. Welcome, Sister.
Woo-hoo. Thank you.
And
good to be here.
We're also joined by Brother Brad Probst, coming to us live from downtown Corvallis, Oregon, the home of Barnum Lodge number 7. Welcome, Brother Brad.
Pleasure to be here. Thank you, Toby.
It's great to have you here. This episode, we're going to be talking about something that I think is pretty amazing, both just for the fact that it happened to begin with, and then for the fact that it was done in such a professional and smooth way. A couple of weeks ago, I think it's been almost a month now, the Grand Encampment, Rebecca Assembly, and Grand Lodge of Oregon all had online sessions. Now, for those of you listening to this in mid to late June or even later on downloading it after the fact, the coronavirus pandemic has shut down almost all lodge activities around the world, but specifically here in the Pacific Northwest for at least a year. And I know here in Washington, we had very, very detailed restrictions about what could and could not happen. And for most of the pandemic, any kind of meeting was limited to only essential personnel, no more than 5 people. And I know that things were sort of similarly restrictive in Oregon. So most everybody did not get to hold their jurisdictional sessions last year in 2020. Well, in Oregon, your sessions are normally in mid-May, and that was still kind of early in the recovery from the pandemic. So I think all of the leaders down there in Oregon came up with a really brilliant solution, and that was to have an online session. So this episode of the Three Links Oddcast, we're going to be talking about that session, how it got put together, some of the technical challenges of doing that, and the way that those challenges were met and managed. So first question goes to you, Sister Pearlie. You're the Grand Scribe of the Grand Encampment. How many encampments do you have to deal with there in Oregon?
We've got 5 encampments.
Okay. And now, what's the geographical distribution? Are they all kind of close together, spread out across all corners of the state? What's the geography like on that?
We've got one in Grants Pass, which is Paran, and we've got Hillsboro 84, Golden Rule, which is in Milwaukee, and we've got Corvallis, which is Heart of the Valley, and we have the Willamette number 2, which is now going to be meeting in Albany. They were meeting in Lebanon. So we've got the 5 encampments that we work with.
Okay, so pretty much everybody's on the west side of the Cascades.
Yep.
Okay, so for a normal session, it would not be too difficult for all of your patriarchs and matriarchs to gather together in one place, have a one-day session, sit down, do the committee work, vote on any issues that come up, elect the members, do the installation. So how did you approach this as the Grand Scribe when it comes to putting together an online electronic meeting of the Grand Encampment?
Well, what I did, as soon as our executive decided to do a Zoom, then that's when I decided to go ahead and try rewriting our order of business, because you can't do any of the secret work when you're online or on a Zoom meeting. So I went through our order of business and took out everything that was a secret work, which was our signs and our passwords. We couldn't even do the Grand Encampment degree. So I went through and rewrote the whole procedure. And then once that was rewritten, once I got that written, then I emailed them out to all of the officers so they would have a copy. And then especially to the Grand Patriarch, Michael, so he'd have a format to follow. And then I took the next step further, and I also rewrote the installation of officers, and I adapted that to an online Zoom procedure. And that one was probably more difficult to do than the order of business, because the order of business was easy. I just, went through and left out all the secret stuff. But with the installation, we had to symbolically put the regalia on them and symbolically do this and symbolically do that. But the officers that did the installation did a superb job. It was really great with the way it was handled. But it was a lot of paperwork on my part, but I loved doing it. It was great. And on top of that, I also had to do the advanced proceedings, which was all having to be done, and emailed out to everybody.
Now that's a good place to start with this, because normally, especially here in Washington, my home jurisdiction, advanced proceedings, we usually try and get them to lodges and encampments about 6 weeks in advance. So was there anything different about collecting all the officer reports, all the financial reports, packaging that up and sending it out to people electronically rather than the usual way with the nice printed cover on it with the tent and all that stuff?
Well, it was actually easier because I could do it by email. And we only had 2 patriarchs that did not have email that I just popped in by snail mail, and the rest of everything else was just emailed. They had all their officers' reports into me. And so it was just easy to go ahead and just add it, because I did everything on the computer. So it was easy just to insert all of that through my outline. And then once everything was done, then I just did a PDF file for everyone, and then put everybody's name and email addresses in there, and then shot it off to them. And I think I had it, what was it, a month or a month and a half in advance. Toby, you want to do, I had them out, 2 months early?
Yeah.
About 2 months, didn't I?
Yeah, you've really set the bar pretty high for yourself now, especially now that you're going through the chairs of the Grand Lodge.
I know.
Because you were so on top of that. I was so impressed. Just so those people out there listening know, I participated in the encampment and Grand Lodge sessions for Oregon, and it was really great to be able to get everything and to have a complete order of business and everything all put together. Because for those who don't know, normally as a presiding officer at a grand session, you have a big book in front of you that tells you what to do, when to do it. It's all scheduled out. Okay, but the presiding officer is usually the only person who has that. So for everybody else, they're relying on cues from the presiding officer for what's going to be next. Now, what usually happens, and I saw this somewhat this past week when I was at the Grand Lodge of Wyoming, the presiding officer is not always exactly entirely sure what's next. So there's a lot of interchange between the grand secretary or grand scribe and the presiding officer saying, okay, do we do this now? Wait, who am I supposed to introduce someone now? Do we take up the password? So that's, that's one of the things. You had that all so clearly spelled out in the format that you wrote up, the basic online Grand Encampment of Oregon. This is how we start the business. This is how we do everything. Because as you mentioned, you can't do the Grand Encampment degree. There's no way that you can do the degree work over Zoom that's going to be restricted to just the candidates eligible to take it. With that in mind, at a certain point, you had to start talking about the technical end of how to make this work. And that's where Brother Brad comes in.
Mm-hmm.
Now, Brad, give us a little background on your experience with Zoom and running online meetings.
As soon as this all came down, I realized that, there would be the issue with some of our members not wanting to use Zoom and not able to use Zoom. And so I jumped in the middle of it for our lodge to create a hybrid Zoom room. So folks could show up wearing masks, social distance, and be in our lodge room, while most of the members chose to be at home. And so I set it up there, and as they are now realizing, they made really good guinea pigs in preparation for Grand Lodge. By the time Grand Lodge rolled around and it was said, well, we're going to do Grand Lodge via Zoom, I got up and contacted Ron Coons, our Grand Secretary, and said, Ron, how are you going to do this? This is like more than 100 members Zooming in. What kind of equipment are you using? What kind of, and before I knew it, I was in charge. So I should know by now that that's the way these things work. But anyway, the really special thing about that is both Ron Coons, our Grand Secretary, and Gordon Corda, our Grand Master, both saw the benefits of having a Grand Lodge Zoom room. Particularly Gordon was interested in having it to be used throughout the year then for committees, particularly the executive committee, and that people could Zoom in from all over the state and save a bunch of driving around. And so he was all for it, and which meant that they were willing to commit some money. And so I was able to put together what I considered the dream Zoom room for a Grand Lodge. You can spend a lot of money, $5,000 easy you can spend on a corporate Zoom room that attaches different corporate meeting rooms together. But that's not exactly what a Grand Lodge needs. Grand Lodge is basically a room full of people, your officers, and then you have 100 people attending. For that kind of thing, you don't need a Zoom room that has its own computer built in and its iPad on the table. What turned out to be I looked over the equipment, and I don't know if you want me to geek out and tell you the kind of equipment we ended up using, but it turned out to be work out really well for us.
Yeah, I think it'd be beneficial to kind of run over like any sort of like technical aspects, if you had to like have any special considerations or buy anything special for it, just for anybody listening that if they're going to try to replicate it in their own jurisdiction.
In looking over what's available now and things that have been, this is not like state-of-the-art cutting edge, which of course you pay dearly for that. This had been out for a year or two, and Logitech has a group video conferencing system that has expansion mics, and that seemed to me to be a good fit for our Oddfellow type situation. Was able to put together a classic Zoom room where you've got we already had the board table, which is about 15 foot long, with was able to easily put a half a dozen chairs around it with the Grand Master at the like with the encampment, the Grand Patriarch at the head of the table, and then at the opposite end of the table having a flat screen mounted on the wall. And this was something I just went down to Costco and got a $699 70-inch diagonal flat screen, mounted it on the walls with a swivel to aim it towards the group, and then set this a Logitech Zoom camera just below that on the table. And it ends up having a base station that sits in the middle of the table, and then beyond that, reaching out to the opposite end of the table where the chair is, they actually have a what they call an expansion mic, and these are little discs that sit along the table. Anyone along the table is able to reach out and push a button on it, and it mutes the entire room. And anyone can push a button on that expansion mic and it unmutes the entire room. And they light up either blue as a hot room or red as if the room is muted. And so with a little bit of explanation beforehand, people walking in cold, having never seen the system, grasped it, and were able to have a good meeting. Just that fast.
Fantastic.
So here's a problem that we run into very frequently. How did you get people to stop talking over each other, or how did you get the flow to work out?
Well, that's a very good question, and
I think it's because I wasn't there.
That's probably part of it. Yeah.
Yeah, and of course, everybody who's ever been to a Grand Lodge session knows that in every jurisdiction, there are one or two very senior, very respected past Grandmasters who want to get up and talk about everything and challenge everything. That's not how we did it at the Grand Lodge session of 1986. So how were you able to work out who was talking and who should or should not be talking?
we had that challenge right off the bat, and actually I was expecting the worst. And so we did a trial and error
with Grand Encampment.
Yes.
Right. We did encampment, trial and error. And we started off with a big error where we tried to make it so people could not unmute themselves. So we had to call on them in order to unmute them. And that is the check mark that you get to do with a Zoom session, but it failed miserably. And the main reason was that there were people, which is a big issue, people calling in on just like a flip phone. And they have no way of waving at you and telling you that they want to be unmuted. And
They can't raise their hand in the chat thing.
There's
Yeah.
nothing they can do to get called on. So that failed miserably. Though I would recommend that you just don't have people using flip phones, and that everybody has got to know somebody with an iPhone that they can use for this meeting. You got to have a smartphone or something rather than just calling in on a landline.
Sure.
It gives you the opportunity to actually see somebody raise their hand. It just makes it so much easier. To have to go to the lowest common denominator and make the system work with that is a big burden, and it's not necessary. Everybody can have a smartphone if they want to come in. I don't think that's a big hurdle.
Did you have a lot of issues with some of the, I don't want to put, a stereotype, but with some of the older members who might not be as tech savvy and might be a little more curmudgeon-y? Did you have any pushback from them to not embrace the Zoom meeting, or was everybody pretty compliant and down to give it a try?
I think it was pretty darn compliant. In fact, surprisingly, we were able to put people on the honor system to mute themselves unless they were called on, and they did really well that way. And so that became the norm. That way we did our trial and error. We found out that people could be responsible, and ultimately, the chair of the meeting has a gavel, and when the gavel comes down, mute all gets clicked by me as moderator, and that settles it right fast.
Ooh, that's a nice feature.
Yeah, man, I wish we could mute all in our live Grand Lodge sessions. Oh, wait, I should edit that out. I don't want that going out. I'll worry about that later. So that raises another question, because, Brother Brad, you mentioned something really great there, which is you as moderator, when it was necessary, you could mute all.
Yes.
But normally in a live in-person session, the presiding officer has the gavel or the crook, depending on whether it's Grand Lodge or Grand Encampment. You know, one blow calls the Grand Lodge to order and seats the Grand Lodge.
We know it's only the secretaries that are crooks.
Ah, come on. But given that additional sort of technological gatekeeping going on, what were some of the challenges that you think the presiding officers had in moving through the order of business in this sort of new way? Because one thing that our listeners may not know about the session is all of the officers were in the room together. So everybody was at the conference room at the Holgate Center there in Portland. So you got the Grand Master, Deputy Grand Master, Grand Warden, Grand Chaplain, Grand Secretary, Grand Treasurer. They're all in the room there. Although actually, the Grand Treasurer, you were there. You were in the room, right, Pearlie?
For the Grand Lodge session, I stayed home.
Oh, that's right. You stayed. You did Grand Lodge from home.
Yeah, Ron said I really didn't need to be there for the Grand Lodge session because it'd have been a lot of people.
Yeah. But basically, everybody necessary for running the session was in the boardroom at the Holgate Center. But you're not just managing those 6 or 7 people in the boardroom. You've also got everybody who's watching on Zoom, and it's not just mostly the individuals who are at their home computer at home. You also had a couple of lodge halls set up that had computers or tablets or some other kind of technology device so that members who were not as tech savvy could be at the lodge hall and experience that. So how does that impact running the meeting and doing the business if you're the chair of the meeting?
I know where you're going, Toby.
Yes.
you're talking about voting, Toby. We know where you're headed with that one.
Well, not just voting, but all of the normal things that happen in a session. Committee report is given, and there's usually discussion of the committee report. Then there's the separate issue of how does everybody vote. But in the first place, how do you, as a presiding officer, manage all of the discussion that has to happen in a Grand Lodge or Grand Encampment session? Because that's normally where the discussion of things happens.
Yeah, I think if I'm following you for what you're looking for, when you have 100 people in a Zoom session, you actually end up having multiple screens of people on your 70-inch diagonal screen. And so as moderator, I'm constantly flipping back and forth through several screens, looking for people to have raised hands as the business is moving on. And the chair of the meeting is able to watch this too. And everyone's watching for hands to go up, and they'll actually call out when they see somebody with a hand up. And then when somebody raises their hand, they can be called on. And as moderator, I can share the spotlight with them and with the Zoom room. And so everybody at home, that's what pops up on their screen as they see the person who is addressing the chair and the chair. And that can be either zoomed in as the room or just the chair. A little bit more about, and then, okay, a little bit more, I just interject here. With this particular system of this Logitech group, not only does it zoom the camera for the room, but it it actually has the ability to swivel around and focus on anyone sitting at the table. And you can have it just in that direction or zoomed in just at their face. So before the meeting, you go around and you focus in on each person in the room in the chair, and you've got 5 different preset buttons, just like you have on your radio. Once you get it zoomed in, you push that button down and hold it, and it sets it. And so then as different people speak around the table, all you do is hit this button, the camera swings around, zooms in on them, and you can spotlight them along with whoever they're talking with out in Zoom world. And it makes it real slick, and depending on whatever's going on. Now, what can be going on, and the thing about voting, I mean, first of all, and this was something that our Grand Secretary Ron Coons came up with right away, was mail-in voting. And that was a huge benefit that we may keep.
Yeah, that was great for the Grand Encampment too, because I mailed out all my ballots to all those qualified to vote that had registered, and it was so slick. I mean, I got all the ones I sent out, I got back. Yeah. So it was the best way to do it.
It's excellent, and the way that a ballot was made to be unforgeable is it carried the seal.
Yep.
Now that brings up a question. Since we've moved into talking about voting, normally nominations are taken from the floor. Mm-hmm. So, like everybody has in their Constitution, 11 o'clock on the first day is when you nominate and elect your officers. So normally at the session, there are nominations made from the floor. Now, everybody pretty much knows who's going to be elected Grand Master and Deputy Grand Master. But Grand Warden is usually somewhat of a surprise because the nomination comes from the floor. Sometimes there's some chatter before the session. Oh, we think this is the year that so-and-so is going to run, or it's her time to go through the chairs and something like that. So how did you handle nominations for Grand Warden or Grand Junior Warden in the case of the Grand Encampment?
We sent out nomination sheets, and they could put in their nomination for each of the offices. And like I say, we had for the Grand Patriarch, Grand Senior Warden, Grand Junior Warden, and the Sovereign Grand Lodge Rep. And so they could fill in their names. And as far as the Grand Treasurer, we had put down the name that was eligible to run, and same with the Grand Senior Warden, that they were eligible to be reelected. So the patriarchs had an opportunity to do their nominations ahead of time. We gave them a time frame. They had to be back to us at a certain time, a certain date. And so they had quite a while. They had a couple of months that they could think of their nominations. And then we closed the nominations at that time. We don't accept any more nominations after that date. And then when sessions came, we kept the votes in a sealed envelope. And with the Grand Encampment, I used my Grand Encampment seal. And once the nominations came back to me, or I would log them. And then when I got ready to send out my ballots, then I knew what the nominations were, and I could list those on my ballot. And then those were sent out with the self-addressed stamped envelope back to me with my address in both spots. That way I did not know who the who the ballots came from. And then I just tucked those away, kept them sealed, and did not even open them until we had Grand Encampment sessions. And then that's when they were opened, and that's when everything was tallied.
That was a really smart method.
It worked out really well. And that's the way the Grand Lodge did theirs too.
So how do you think that you would have handled nominations that would have happened?
You mean I think what you're referring to is a nomination from the floor.
Yeah, correct.
During the actual meeting.
Sorry.
Yes,
like if there was like a last minute person who was like, wait, I want to be nominated.
Yeah.
Yeah, we actually, Grand Encampment was first, and we didn't have that happen. But with the sending out the nomination sheets, those were sent out to everyone that had registered. And so they had, like I say, they had a certain time frame that they could nominate somebody. And once that nomination closed, we were not accepting nominations after that.
Okay.
So they had 2 months, at least 2 months to make their nominations.
I think that is actually a very clever way of managing that, because you're not prohibiting nominations from the floor, but by having everybody register for the session ahead of time, sending out ballots or nomination forms ahead of time to everyone who registered, that means it is extremely unlikely that you would get someone who just showed up. Because, even in real life, sometimes there will be extenuating circumstances. Someone won't get to register for the session and they will show up unexpectedly. Okay, so for that person to have a voice in the session, they ask recognition from the chair. Well, if they are eligible to nominate someone for an office, they can do that from the floor. But by having everyone pre-registered and sending the nominations ahead of time, that makes it extremely unlikely that you're going to have to deal with that. That was really a very clever and very effective solution for that.
Yeah, I also when I sent out my nominations, I was also including a self-addressed stamped envelope. So there was no excuse for them not to send their nomination back. They had postage paid envelope. And we did the same thing with the ballots.
That's a good combination of old school and new school kind of together to work to the best result. Most efficient. It's a very efficient workaround, and I applaud you guys for developing that.
It worked really well, really well. I ended up with 20, I think we had 30 people registered and there was 25 that was eligible to vote. And because of, being a past chief patriarch. So like I say, I got all 25 ballots back that I sent out. So that was pretty good. Yeah.
Now that takes care of voting for officers. However, during the normal course of business, for any of our listeners who've not attended a Grand Lodge or Grand Encampment session, pretty much all the information that goes through the Grand Lodge gets reviewed by committees. Committees report to the Grand Lodge. After reviewing information, Grand Lodge votes to accept the committee report. It becomes part of the permanent record. That's the normal way of doing business at an in-person session. So when you're handling things like committees reviewing the Grand Master's correspondence or reviewing judiciary petitions, appeals, how does the committee work change when you're doing these online sessions? Because then, of course, the committees have to present reports and the Grand Lodge or Grand Encampment has to vote on it. So how does that process change?
Okay, what we did, I worked with Grand Patriarch Michael Guerrero, and we spent probably almost an hour on the phone. He went through all the people registered and he appointed his committees. And then at that point, once the committees are appointed, then I put together a packet for each committee chairperson and listed their names, all their email addresses and or phone numbers. And I also included the duties of the committees, what their duties were for each committee. And so these packets went out to the chairperson, and it was their responsibility to contact their committee members. So they had all their work done. They had all their committees done, and they contacted them, had everything done ahead of time. And so all they had to do at the sessions was give their report. And it worked out really, really well. And they all responded really well with handling their committees ahead of time like that.
And then it was simply as they gave the report, it was put up to approve their report, and we just did a show of hands, and an overwhelming show of hands would cinch the deal.
Yep, and it worked out really well doing that way.
Do you think that with that streamlined process that you have developed for the committees and the voting and everything, Do you think there will be any aspects of that that you will carry forward into future sessions, even back in person?
It would be nice to be able to do committees ahead of time, because that would save a lot of time if they could have all of the work done before sessions. And then once you get to sessions and all they have to do is just give the report. Worked out really well for the Grand Encampment to do that.
Another part that carried on into the Grand Lodge session then was there's more elections that go on
Yep.
for the different committees, who's going to be on the committees. And something that happens by doing this work ahead of time is that in past years when in Grand Lodge and all of a sudden, and who's going to fill this position for this committee? And everybody kind of looks around, you want to do it? Whatever, there's some last minute. And we end up getting people. I was put on one that I realized, hold it, I can't go to that many meetings. I didn't realize what it actually entailed. And the thing about it, when we do this ahead of time, it's described what each of the duties are of these different positions, how many times they often meet during a year, where they meet and how they meet, and what's expected of you in those positions. And then people can more accurately decide whether they even want to run for that.
Yep.
And if they want to accept nomination or not. And so all in all, there's just very good benefits for figuring this stuff out ahead of time.
Well, I think that's potentially something that could, like Ainsley said earlier, having the committee reports organized, committee meetings happening ahead of time is something that could go forward to really help the functionality of sessions in the future. I like this idea of pre-planning appointments, letting people know ahead of time the commitment of a certain committee. Because I know in Oregon you have a few committees that really take a lot of time. It's a serious time commitment, several meetings a year, and that's a lot of work to ask of someone on the spur of the moment, on the floor, say, Jerry, do you want to be on this committee? We meet 8 times a year and you've got to drive to Portland for each of those meetings. Well, maybe Jerry doesn't want to drive. Or another example, our newspaper committee in Washington, we had an elderly Rebecca who no longer drove, but she lived along the train route. So she would ride Amtrak into town and then do the committee meeting, stay the night in a hotel until she could get the next train back out of town. That got to be very expensive for the newspaper committee to have her coming and attending by train and staying overnight at the hotel. So by having this committee information up front, in advance, people can be much more prepared and make good choices about how they're going to serve on various committees and do other jobs for the Grand Lodge or the Grand Encampment. Now, I've got another question here, which is going to lead us up to our break when we can listen to a message from our sponsor, Pig and Pug Bath Stuff. How do you think that record keeping has changed for sessions as a result of doing the online meeting? Because it used to be you'd put the cassette recorder at the secretary's desk and hope that it picked up everybody talking. And then over the next couple months, the grand scribe or grand secretary gets the painful task of deciphering all of that mumbling from across the room as somebody stands up to challenge something that's said on the floor. And, you're trying to piece together what was said so you can create an accurate journal of proceedings. So how do you think record keeping has changed doing this online meeting?
As the person that kept the initial record, being the moderator, I was recording on the computer, the laptop that I was using to do the Zoom sessions. And so I had the huge file that then compiles after the meeting. And ultimately, we downloaded those onto a flash drive. And then those were able to be handed to the secretary of each group meeting, or can be delivered via Dropbox. It takes something huge. Dropbox turned out to be the best one. I tried several, but Dropbox is just so much faster. They got it down. And yeah, then you get everything. And I'm telling you, I had to tell folks at the table, don't even try to get away with whispering in this room. These expansion mics will pick up everything. And if this room's hot, you keep it buttoned unless you want it recorded. And it has everything. Everybody who talks. We even had. So anyway, for record keeping, yeah, you got it.
What a tease. There's a juicy tidbit coming and then you halted it.
Yeah, is there some gossip about the Moran Fund or something I need to hear about?
Oh, we had, by the way, a couple of things, how it actually, the functions going on is we chose to use the virtual ante room so that people could log on and check their microphone and their speakers and all. And with that, all they would see coming in is they would see the Grand Lodge seal, and it would be like, wait here in the virtual ante room until you'll be let in when the meeting starts. And so we would let people come in there, and they could actually then we'd let everybody in at once and let them have a while to chat while we kept for our Zoom room just the seal up. And then people can enter the room just like in Grand Lodge. Everyone's talking before the meeting comes to order. They can chat back and forth. And of course, we've got recorded now hunting stories and all kinds of things that that seemed to work really well. And we even went on break and just put the Grand Lodge seal up and let everybody stay in the room and mingle around during the break time. And anyway, it's virtually a Grand Lodge.
Yeah. Now, Pearlie, speaking as the Grand Scribe for the Grand Encampment, how has the record keeping and dissemination process changed for you with this online session?
Actually, the advanced proceedings is my outline for my annual proceedings, because it's technically going to be the same thing. And then I will just, whatever happened in the sessions, I will just transpose into my annual proceedings. So I'm just pretty well following what I had in the advanced proceedings, and I'll go right into my annual proceedings. And I still have to get my recording from Brad. I haven't got that yet. It's been too busy right now. But I think it's going to be a lot easier. Of course, Toby, you were the only guest speaker we had. So
yeah.
But I think it's just going to be a lot easier, because I actually really didn't take that many notes, because with the committees already being done, I could just check off approved, because they had already had all their work done. And then I can just fall back on the recording to just pick up things that I had missed. But most of my stuff is going to be just, following along with the advanced proceedings and just fill in everything. So it'll be a lot easier. Of course, I'll be a lot better than what Grand Lodge is. He's going to have a whole ton of stuff so Grand Encampment isn't near as busy.
That's why Grand Encampment is always a good test bed, because you can run, you've only got 5 encampments. You've got at most 20 people participating in the meeting. It's functional, and it's fairly easy to sort out what's going on. Now, of course, Grand Lodge, Oregon, you folks down there do a fantastic job of keeping your lodges in operation. I'm always giving you guys props here on the podcast. And so Ron, bless his heart, he stayed so calm and focused during some of the more chaotic parts where, you've got 4 people who are all eligible to vote, and they're sharing the same connection on one phone. It's trying to sort out, okay, who's eligible to vote on this, and how do we count the votes? And, he did just a fantastic job of that. But, you're talking about more than 40 lodges in Oregon. Mm-hmm. That is a lot more people to sort of keep focused and keep moving in the same direction than what the Grand Encampment had to deal with.
Yeah, he has like 47 lodges. That's what I kept telling him, my advanced proceedings are done, Ron. And and he was, really working a lot. I said, but I know, Ron, you've got, oodles more than I do. So, just mine's done. So I was always teasing him, but yeah, he's got a whole heck of a lot more to work with than what I do.
And, to be fair, it takes a long time for a carrier pigeon to make it all the way into Portland from someplace like Heppner, Oregon.
Yeah, he's on vacation now, so he's out backpacking. So he needs the
Smart.
time off. Yeah.
You know, that's one of the things, Laurel, our Grand Secretary in Washington, the vacation always comes like the first week of July, just after sessions is done. She just puts everything in the office and says, okay, I'm not going to think about anything for at least the next week. And that brings us up to our commercial break here. We're going to take just a moment and listen to the dulcet tones of this word from our sponsor. And then we'll be back with more Three Links Oddcast right after this.
Hi. You know the crazy lady outside the coffee shop? The one who screams at everyone who walks by about how the Church of Scientology controls the price of avocados? Well, can you remember how she smells? If you're using store-bought soaps, that's probably how you smell right now. I know what you're thinking. Is this why my last girlfriend left me? Well, that's a complex issue that maybe we'll get into some other time. Where was I? Oh yes, Pig and a Pug. Founded in the year 1981, they have been supplying soaps, candles, and assorted bath products the world over, basically since Moses wore short pants. Not only do I record the commercials, but I'm also one of the converted. Their sandalwood hot processed soaps have made my scaly lizard-like skin feel silky like the finest mashed potatoes that you've ever had. For listeners of this podcast, and this podcast only, Pig and a Pug have extended to you a special 24% off coupon to be used on Etsy. Just use the code THANKYOU24 at checkout and you're on your way. Look them up on Facebook, Instagram, and Etsy. Also, select retail merchants. Pig and a Pug, Pig and a Pug, Pig and a Pug.
All right, welcome back to the Three Links Oddcast. Toby Hansen, Ainsley Heilich, special guest host Christopher McHale. We are talking about the recent online sessions held by the Grand Lodge, Grand Encampment, and Rebecca Assembly of Oregon. And we've got two very knowledgeable, very experienced guests with us. And I'm not just saying that because I like them. I think they did an excellent job on the sessions. Sister Pearlie Stewart, who is the Grand Scribe of the Grand Encampment of Oregon, and Brother Brad Probst, who was the technical director and moderator of all of the online sessions. So before the break, we were talking a little bit about how everything went, how to handle committee reports, how to handle voting, how to handle kind of translating the normal stuff that we would do over the course of 2 or 3 days into a one-day online format. So a lot of stuff gets compacted, a lot of things get moved around. Pearlie, you told us about how you had to rewrite the entire guide for the Grand Encampment, taking out all of the unwritten work, so no signs and passwords, not conferring the Grand Encampment degree. And looking at that, now you've done one, and you are probably going back to meeting in person next year in Salem. And I think it's going to be in Salem, right?
Yeah, it'll be in Salem.
Okay, so we are going back to Salem next year. What do you think is going to change the way sessions happen in person in the future? Because we've just had this experience, a little rough around the edges in places, but a very efficient way to get business done. So having had this experience, what do you think is going to change going forward for our grand sessions?
Well, for the Grand Encampment, I'd like to see our Grand Patriarch continue doing the committee appointments ahead of time, because that does save time. Because typically at our sessions, the canton meets before us. So technically we only have a half a day. And then the Grand Encampment was meeting at like 1 o'clock till 4 or 5. So in person, so even with that time frame, I'd like to see Grand Patriarch Gary appoint the committees ahead of time, like past Grand Patriarch Michael did, because that would save us some time there too. But that was probably the biggest change. We'll probably actually go back to doing the order of business where we can have all the grand encampment degree and everything in. But that would be the one change I'd like to see Gary do, is keep the committees ahead of time, get them appointed ahead of time.
Now, Brad, here's a kind of a follow-up question for you. Do you think there's going to be a place for more of this kind of technology at future sessions that are held in person? Because one thing that was really nice, obviously none of us had to, take 4 days out of our life and attend all of the Oregon sessions. I love going down to Oregon. You guys do a great job with your sessions down there, but it's a big time commitment. So if you're talking to the representative from, say, Burns, Oregon, which is out in the middle of Eastern Oregon, that's a pretty long drive to get over the mountains to Salem to spend 4 days doing all of this business. If there were an option for representatives to be able to participate remotely, how do you think that would work? And do you think that's something that would even be viable once we can start meeting together in person?
Toby, thank you so much for lobbing this slow and across the plate for me here. Because really, this is like right down my alley. We have members in our lodge that really do not want to see Zoom participation go away ever. And just from our lodge perspective, these meetings can be the death of memberships of young people moving in. We've had young students come in that we've held on to for a little while, because this lodge really does some stuff, does some volunteer work, goes out and plants trees and does traffic control for different events in town. And we're out there, the community sees us, these younger students wanting to be involved with what these guys are doing, what these odd people are doing. And they'll show up and for a few meetings, but they, for a whole evening of having a meal and the meeting and after and all, and they get home and they're behind on their homework. And this doesn't last for long. They end up that's just too much. They're not retired. And people that have their kids. And we've had in this lodge before childcare that we tried to hold for having young people that back when I was a younger person, I remember this going on. But it's tough for younger folks, which is the lifeblood, which is the answer for the continuation of Odd Fellows. This is where we have a future, is when we have people that have some years yet to spend coming into our order. And there's also, so this is something that our members in this lodge never want to see go away. When it comes to Grand Lodge, it has always been a problem trying to get more involvement with Grand Lodge. People from the far outstretches of our state coming in to be involved with our Grand Lodge. And, Portland is Northern Oregon, and there's a whole state that gets further and further away, and we got lodges all over the state. So this, to get proper representation and not just have the same people circulating around the table at our Grand Lodge, that we actually bring in people that bring in the state, and people that are younger, people that maybe can't afford 4 days of hotel fees to come and wear their tuxedo and come to a banquet and all. This cuts a lot of people out, and if we're going to be inclusive, having an electronic attendance is a piece of that I see, and particularly that it's on a Saturday when we actually have our voting happen, where people are they know the people in their corner of the state, they know who's nominated, they know who they want to vote for, and they don't have to disrupt their entire lives to be represented. And so I would really love to see it, that when we do meet in person, it would be great, because yes, I love eating at the banquet and meeting with the folks and carousing in the banquet hall, and all dressing in their finest and all. It's a wonderful event. But I would also like to have, when the business is getting done, have that flat screen on the wall, and we can have anonymous polling that we worked with at this Grand Lodge session. And it gets kind of tricky when you got multiple people on one screen, but we figured out how we could do that. We would have like 4 polls in a row, and first person on that screen vote this time, second person the next time. We figure out which screen has the most people in it. There's 5 people there, we'll have 5 polls, and then and everybody on one screen votes in the first poll. And anyway, we figured out you can do this, and you end up with an anonymous count at the bottom, electronic voting, and with no names attached. But this is it's doable, and we could certainly have, you know, Grandmaster. We've got someone with their hand up out in virtual Oregon Lodge world and Oregon Grand Lodge world. So it's I think it can be done. I've sat there as moderator and called attention for people raising their hand. I think it could happen in a larger setting where there's more people attending in person.
So the idea of a larger setting kind of gives me a good segue here for a 2-part question that I have for you. Do you think that at some point the Sovereign Grand Lodge is going to say, right, this is clearly going to be something that's going to be beneficial just across the board for us? Do you think that they are going to kind of take that next and like pretty crazy sounding step to figure out rules and regulations to kind of govern the way that Zoom could potentially come into, larger scale meetings? And then also, do you think that they would use what you have done as a model to come up with some of their ideas?
You can be the new Sovereign Grand moderator.
Yeah.
I'll tell Terry to order you a collar.
It's going to look like computer chips or something.
I have to learn
Mic
to keep
cables.
my mouth shut. Well, I think that there would have to be some rules, just as we have rules for our like executive committee meetings. We are a nonprofit. There are rules about how you can have voting on a phone conversation. That there has to be time for the vote to be announced. And we have to apply. We have to abide by the nonprofit rules and all already. There's an overlay of the state rules of how a nonprofit is able to do its decision making. So we start from there, and then how it applies to our particular order and our ceremonies. And
brilliant.
I'm almost envisioning like a hybrid model, almost like what some of the high-end auction houses do, where they have the web people in the phone block and all that stuff, and the in-person bidding for items. So for voting, that could be easily kind of adopted in a way and have it still be secure and anonymous.
And also super real time, like no lag, no nothing, because in an auction, things like that actually matter. So
yes,
it would open up a good position for, the grand IT guy, or we'd have to think of some sort of whimsical name, because the title is almost as important as the actual work that you're doing.
The Sovereign Grand Facilitator.
Yeah.
So I have a couple questions that spin off of this. So being that you did have this online option that is more accessible for more people who wouldn't have otherwise been able to attend, did the demographic of the attendees, did you have people logging in that otherwise would have not been at the in-person session? Like younger people, working people, anybody like that?
Interestingly enough, I don't get around to the other lodges enough. I know that Ron was recognizing lots of people from around the state who he's communicated with, but I'm sure that well, I feel confident that yeah, when in these lodges we had a couple lodges that were doing like calling into me asking how can I put my HDMI cord off of my laptop to our flat screen on the wall in our lodge so that a group can meet. And I'm sure not everybody would have shown up at Grand Lodge. We're getting more involvement.
Hey, with the technical issues that we have on this podcast, you could be very useful around here, and we could pay you weekly, very weekly.
But
Yeah, I got nothing better to do, man.
I'll be here all night. Thank you.
So ideally, it sounds like, you know, everybody wants to know how to get more young people involved at Grand Lodge, all that kind of great stuff. And maybe if you get them hooked by logging in virtually for a year, and then the next year they might be more inclined to go in person because it's less of this nebulous, very scary foreign idea to them. Which leads me into my next question. So for everybody involved who's been to the virtual sessions, what is the biggest thing that you missed about not having an in-person session? And what was the biggest thing you were glad that you didn't have to do because you weren't in person?
I think even though I was going to say, well, I didn't have to be in a hotel for like 4 days.
That's what I was going to say.
My life. I was going to say
Salem
that.
has
So
really
convenience and
wonderful
cost.
hotels along the freeway.
Yeah. But actually, I ended up sleeping on a futon in the Grand Lodge office for 4 days. Really
He
was
did.
not much
He
different.
did while he was trying to set up the system.
Wow.
Better than sleeping next to my wife, I'll tell you that.
Oh,
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 And there goes our sponsor.
oh no.
well, I'll be the judge of that. Well,
Oh.
what I would like to say somewhere in here is that doing this kind of work, though, was helping people in this respect that are helping so many more people then is exponentially rewarding. So the whole thing turned out to be very good for me to be able to help it all come off. And we're good for another year, just like that. And
Wonderful.
very happy with how it turned out.
You know, Ainsley, I actually have a follow-up to your question. Having attended the online sessions in Oregon, having attended another online installation of another jurisdiction, and then recently visited a jurisdiction in person, I was having a conversation about this experience of having done the online session. And it was with one of our older members in another jurisdiction, and he said, you know, I have a problem with doing these online meetings. I know that some people are good with the technology, but some aren't. And if we rely too much on the technology, we're disenfranchising those people. And I said, while that is true, we have also adopted a model that disenfranchises a whole different group of people, because we tend to meet, you know, take, say, 3 days is a pretty good average length for a good-sized jurisdiction. I know California goes a little longer than that, but here in Washington, it's 3 days. We do our Grand Lodge, Rebecca Assembly, Grand Encampment, Grand LEA, all together in 3 days. And what we do in putting everything in the paradigm of meeting in person is the younger members, the first time past Grand, who is still working and can't take Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday off at the end of June to go to Yakima for a meeting. That is the group that we are currently disenfranchising by not having an online option. You know, if we had something where it was a little different, where we could have an online component to it so you didn't have to travel or you didn't have to take the time off of work. I know my year as Grandmaster, I talked to one of the lodges in Eastern Washington, and I made a big push to get lodges to participate in Grand Lodge that hadn't sent representatives recently. And they said, this brother is the one who is knowledgeable. He's the one who normally would go, but he drives a grain truck. He's got to be on the road by 5 o'clock every morning, and he doesn't get done until 3 o'clock in the afternoon. And this is at a time when he's really busy moving products around the state. So he cannot take the time off in June. If this were in December or February or sometime when he's not busy with that part of his job, it would be easy for him to get the time off. But it's very, very difficult for him to do it. And that's a different perspective on this. By having not necessarily a completely online grand session, but a grand session where you can participate remotely, it opens up participation to people who can't get the time off, can't afford, $80 a night in a hotel next to the freeway, or, they can't afford all the banquet tickets. We are choosing to disenfranchise a lot of the newer, younger, less affluent members. And that's why at the Grand Lodge level or the Grand Encampment level, it tends to be more of the retirees who have the time and money. And frankly, I love Yakima. It's a great city. Do I necessarily want to spend 3 days there in the summer when it is boiling hot wearing a wool suit? I mean, that's something that I do, but for a lot of people, it's like, I only get 5 days of vacation this summer and I want to go somewhere with my family and do that. Do I want to give up over half of my vacation time to go to Yakima and discuss passing a budget for the Grand Lodge? And so we have chosen, by how we set this up with in-person meetings, we are disenfranchising people who otherwise might be able to participate.
You're here.
Right, Toby. And I think we need to fight for both of those people's rights. The people that want to be there in person and the people that want to Zoom in. They both have a right to vote. They both have a right to representation. And I fought through this pandemic to allow there to be a space for people to walk into and attend the meetings, which people were Zooming in going, hold it, they're not social distancing enough. Hold it. They're look, he took his mask off with that microphone, and it was like, yeah, but hold it. We're following the rules here, and this is the way these people want to meet. They want to meet in person. They have a right to, and we're following all of the Oregon rules and all. So, I think both sides need to be fought for their representation, and we can do it. We have the technology.
Absolutely, we can rebuild him. We have the technology.
The $6 million Grand Lodge session.
Man, if we're spending $6 million on Grand Lodge, then I definitely want prime rib at the banquet.
Yeah.
No more of this rubber chicken that they like to serve.
Prime
Maybe
rib
in
always.
1922 they spent $6 million, but
Well, I'll tell a quick little story about grand sessions over in Idaho. I believe it was 2018 when Idaho held the grand sessions in Boise. Ada Lodge number 3 was celebrating their 150th anniversary, and they have a huge, beautiful Oddfellows complex just outside of Boise, so they held the sessions there at their hall. But for the banquets and other events like that, they had it at a hotel, which was actually on the other side of Boise, out by the airport. So that was my year as Grandmaster. So being the Grandmaster of Washington, I go to the Idaho sessions, just like I always like to do in Oregon. We went to the banquet the first night in Idaho, and they were serving baked potatoes. That was the main course. You know, they had a baked potato bar. You could put bacon bits and chives and sour cream and butter and stuff. Okay, this is perfect for the Grand Lodge of Idaho. What better way to celebrate the good, wholesome enterprise of the jurisdiction of Idaho than a baked potato bar? Here's where it all went awry. They had a very good crowd for that grand session in Idaho, and they ran out of potatoes.
No.
Yes.
The Grand Lodge potato famine of
Yes.
2012.
2018.
Oh, 2000. I'm sorry.
Oh
2018.
my word.
Could you imagine a more embarrassing moment for the Grand Lodge of Idaho than to run out of potatoes at their own banquet?
Was there a riot?
Oh
There was
my.
no riot. These are Oddfellows and Rebecca's. We are far too sophisticated and civilized to riot. Everyone just stood around politely waiting while the hotel staff scrambled and got some more potatoes together. But that's my little story about the grand banquet for Idaho and running out of potatoes. That was very. I felt embarrassed on behalf of the state of Idaho for that one. That was very sad.
You could have just gone to a fancy steakhouse and gotten a couple of filet mignons and a glass of Merlot, and you would have been fine.
I know. That would have been excellent. So, Sister Pearlie, Brother Brad, is there anything else that you'd like to tell us about your experience with the online sessions? The one thing I would say I learned from participating is it is critically important to have a moderator running the technical side who is not also the grand scribe or grand secretary, because they're related, but they're two different jobs. And so I think the sessions went as well as they did because you were running the technical side, Brad, and you were running the record keeping side, Pearlie. So that's what I would say about it. What would you guys share about it?
I agree with that, because when I was talking to Ron, I was kind of stressing because I didn't know who was going to host. And I says, well, do I host or do you host or what? And he says, well, he knew he didn't want to have to host. So I think that's when he discussed with Gordon having Brad be our moderator. And so I emailed Brad and I says, yeah, you could be our moderator. He says, please, because I don't want to hassle that plus keeping records. So I think having Brad do our moderating, it helped tremendously, because then I didn't stress. I mean, actually, I was kind of looking forward to the sessions, knowing I didn't have to handle that part of it. He could take care of all of the all of that stuff. And Michael, Grand Patriarch Michael, would look at the screen, and somebody's got their hand up. So, but if we hadn't had Brad, I think it had been a disaster. I really do. And so he stepped up to the plate, and he just took care of everything for Ron and Marilee and I, because he also moderated for the assembly too. So, but that was a good positive thing that came out of that was our moderator.
Well, thank you for it.
Yeah, you did great, Brett. I don't know what I was stressing because I have never hosted anything, and I was willing to learn, but there was no way I was going to be able to handle moderating that plus taking notes. And there was no way I could do that. So I was really thrilled when Ron said that you were going to moderate.
It does work to have somebody who is just on task and facilitating that part of it without having to run the show. But of course, it's not a show without good content. And you guys did the great part of the show of getting the work of the order done. And I just made it look as smooth as possible. And it's kind of like a movie production. But in the part of producing this movie, I do have one more tip for those out there.
Yes, please share.
That are making their Zoom production. Oh, there is that piece about muted. Like if you do decide to mute the room, be sure to tell everybody ahead of time that you're muting the conference room so that everybody out in Zoom world doesn't go crazy thinking that their speaker just died. So
Very important.
We're going to mute the room for a moment and have an internal discussion here. and then they're not freaked out. But one that's even more important than that, perhaps, is when you have a wonderful musician like Toby come on to do our music. The moderator, a big tip for the moderator is the first thing you do before Toby's about to play is you mute all and let him start playing.
Yeah,
So everybody can sing to their heart's content, but you don't have the time lag between them all.
yeah, we did that for Grand Encampment when Toby was playing. I think I even actually wrote it in our order of business that, in fact, Michael, announced at the very beginning, please stay muted until you have to speak, then unmute. And so we specifically asked them to stay muted while Toby did his songs and stuff. So, and I had it all written in on the order of business, whenever Toby was going to be singing and what songs and everything. So I had it all written out. So, I mean, I think that's why mine went so smooth too, is because we had the script done. They had a script to follow.
Certainly did. Hurley had me. I walked into it totally knowing how it was going to go. So that was a confidence builder for me walking into the first meeting.
Yeah, because I sent you everything too. I mean, I don't think I left anybody. I tried to send that to everybody that knew was going to be involved, so they'd know what part they'd have to, they had in the sessions.
Well, that's great. Thank you so much to both of you for everything that you did. And also big thanks to Ron Coons. I know he's on vacation right now, so he couldn't join us. But Ron is really one of the superheroes of Odd Fellowship.
He is.
Here in the Northwest. It is so amazing, all the work that he does. And just in general, I've said this before on the podcast, all of you folks in the jurisdiction of Oregon, you work so hard to help each other be successful. That is one of the reasons why you have so many lodges that are still functioning and still doing well. You're doing great work down there.
Thank you.
That's a big compliment. I thank you for that.
I have one last little question.
Yeah.
So you clearly put in a lot of effort and homework to make it run smoothly and to rewrite that script basically of how to make the meeting go. Is that something that you would be willing to share with other jurisdictions if their grand secretary or their grand scribe reached out to you so that they could kind of use it as a cheat sheet if they were going to, implement it themselves? So that way they could have a more successful?
Yep, you bet. I mean, Toby's got a copy of it too, so.
Yes, I do.
Yeah, I'd be more than willing to do that because it was something I enjoyed doing. And if it can help somebody else, be as a guideline for them. Yeah. And even same with the installation papers that I did. I'm more than willing to pass that on if it's going to help another jurisdiction.
Excellent. Well, that brings us now to the Odd Podge. I do want to mention we have not had a nomination for a lodge shout out here recently. That's why we haven't had any on the shows. So listeners, if there's something going on at a lodge that you want to recognize, tell us about it here on the Three Links Oddcast. You can hit up our website, www.threelinksoddcast.com, and that is with the word 3 written out, or our email address, which is the number 3 linksoddcast@gmail.com. We do enjoy getting your comments, your suggestions for episodes. That's how the music episode came about, was somebody asking what the music of Odd Fellowship was like. So we want to encourage you, if you know of a lodge that's doing something wonderful, tell us about it so we can share the news with all of our listeners. So now on to the Odd Podge. I'm going to go first on this one. Because I just this past week, Christopher and I had the opportunity to go visit the Grand Lodge of Wyoming, and we're going to give some big props to both the Grand Lodge as a whole and also their Grand Secretary, Jim Wilson, because in the past 6 months, they have chartered not one, but 2 new lodges in Wyoming. If you listen to the podcast a couple episodes back, we had brothers Gage and Braden from Thermopolis, Wyoming, who rechartered the lodge there. And apparently they've started a trend because a group got together to revive the charter of Casper Lodge 22 in Wyoming. So Wyoming has 2 new Oddfellows lodges. Also, I want to thank everybody at the Grand Lodge of Wyoming. They were working under some somewhat challenging circumstances, having to get everybody together in a small town in a lodge hall because didn't have access to any bigger facilities at the time. And they just did a fantastic job of getting the work done, making it run very smoothly. I appreciated all of the courtesies that were extended to me as an out of jurisdiction guest. Just good job, Wyoming. Keep up the good work of Odd Fellowship. So that's my Odd Pod. Who would like to share next? Christopher?
Yeah, I'm going to go right after you because I always wait till the very end. But mine is going to kind of tail right off of yours. You mentioned all of the wonderful people that had to do with Odd Fellowship in Wyoming, but I am extremely appreciative of someone just out of that periphery. I think it's important that we thank the good people at RTO Point S
Yes.
in Riverton, Wyoming, because we had such a terrific trip that we blew not one, but two tires over the 4-day trip to Wyoming. And they treated us well, got us in and out with a smile. All thanks to Braden from George Sliney. And,
Yes.
Toby,
did
you take the Buick off-roading again?
No, actually,
sort of, actually. That's the funny thing about it.
Off-roading came to the freeway. So here's what happened since Christopher has mentioned this.
Yeah.
I-90 East rolling through Montana, 80 miles an hour because it's legal there. And we're just east of Livingston where you're kind of coming down out of the mountains onto the Great Plains there. And I'm in the left lane, and there's a big semi-truck to my right. All of a sudden, I noticed there's a deer carcass in the road ahead of me, and I could not move out of the lane because of the truck in the other lane. So I ended up running over the deer carcass. You try and aim to go right over the center of it. And at first we didn't realize anything was wrong. We stopped and got lunch in Columbus, Montana, and then headed south into Wyoming. But along the way, we kept hearing this tuk 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 tuk. Every so often we'd hear this noise. And we pulled into Riverton where the Grand Lodge session was held. And when we get there, we park at the hotel. I look at the left rear tire, and it's missing probably about a 6-inch chunk of the tread. It was still holding air, but the tread was missing. I'm like, okay, this is a problem. So I shoot a text over to Brother Braden, and he says, oh, here's the answer. My cousin Denny runs Riverton Tire, which is RTO Point S tire service there in Riverton. And he says, just take it over there first thing in the morning. They can get you fixed up. So next morning, dropped the car off. Braden gave us a ride over to the Grand Lodge session. They put a used tire on because, I have tires from another company, but they didn't have a shop anywhere within like 200 miles. So I had to get a used tire to make it home. So we drove around the rest of the day on that. We're leaving Thursday morning. We get on the road. We had just like maybe 15 miles out of Riverton. Right rear tire goes flat. So then, side of the road, I pull off, and Christopher puts the spare on. We limp back into Riverton to the same tire shop, and they're like, oh, you're back again. It's like, yeah. So they gave us another used tire, put it on, all of this for less than $100. See,
Wow.
It helps to be an odd fellow and have these connections. And then I actually went over and got the tires replaced under warranty this morning. So we're all good with the Buick again. I'm ready to head out on the road because I have to go to our Washington sessions coming up in about a week and a half over in Yakima. So We are all good to go. And yes, Christopher, you are right. It is excellent to thank the fine folks at Riverton Tire and Oil, RTO Point S Tire Service.
Brilliant.
All right, who else has
Awesome.
something they want to share for the Odd Podge?
I'll go next. First, I wanted to compliment your t-shirt, Toby.
Thank you, Family Lodge 293 in New Jersey. I wore this over in Wyoming.
Wonderful. So I guess this episode will be coming out tomorrow, Sunday.
Yeah, sometime in the next couple days.
So this coming Monday, which might be already passed by the time our viewers are listening, it will be our first in-person meeting in my lodge in over a year.
Yay!
We're going to do a sort of a mini social combined with an open lodge meeting to try to get as many of our candidates that never got initiated to hopefully show up so we can then decide on a day to initiate them. So I'm very excited, and hopefully we'll have a good crowd show up. And if not, that's fine, but we're ready to kind of start rebuilding.
Hallelujah. There
Finally.
is nothing like that feeling of finally getting back to lodge. Once you're
Finally.
back to attending lodge, it feels like all is right in the world again. Brother Brad, Sister Pearlie, anything you'd like to share with the listeners in the Odd Podge?
Well, I'm with the Odd Podge. I'm not exactly sure what is all fair game.
Anything you'd like. You can share anything. It doesn't have to be Oddfellow related. You can tell us about your recent fishing trip or tire
I think
problem.
Chris has a suggestion.
I was
Yeah.
going to say that this falls under new business at the lodge meeting, which everyone knows is just a catch-all for anything that anyone wants to talk about. So,
New business. New business. Well,
new business.
This is not a new question, but it does fit with the Wyoming and regeneration of lodges. And this is something that hits a chord with something I've been interested in for quite a while, and that is about our lodges that go down. And when we end up pulling a charter, they can't get their 5 members together, and the building gets sold off. The charter surrender fund then sits there in case they might actually regenerate, but I don't know of that happening. Money ends up gets absorbed by the Grand Lodge. I would really like to see it that it be considered more. That when a lodge goes down, I mean, the wealth of our Grand Lodges is really in our real estate. I don't know, lots of them have investments, but this real estate, often in these old classic buildings built in the center of downtown on very expensive property now that the town has grown around them, that these lodges, if we, instead of pulling the charter and immediately selling them, if we held on to them and took care of that real estate and let it be a tavern or whatever in the meantime, generate some income, keep it in repair with that income, and then in the future, if we do generate the members that are interested in having a lodge, we've got a lodge there that we can open a lodge like they've done in Wyoming.
Hear, hear.
Great idea.
I'm all for it. I assume this will be a resolution you'll be presenting next year at the Grand Lodge of Oregon session?
I'll keep trying.
Hey, maybe I can become the voting representative from Samaritan number 2, and I'll vote for it.
All right.
And Sister Pearlie, how about you for the Odd Podge? What would you like to share with us?
Just a big thank you to having me on here. I've never done anything like this, so it's quite an experience. I've been pretty busy since our sessions. We took vacation. I think our sessions ended Saturday. We took off on Wednesday, went to Arizona, saw our kids, was there for we stayed for a week and then took 3 days coming home. I was home for 3 days. Then my sister and I headed to Tampa, Florida, and visited with my brother and his family. And we went there for personal reasons. Our sister-in-law passed away with cancer the Monday before we flew home. So at least we were there, got to spend some time with them, and got back home. So it took me probably 3 days to get over the jet lag. But, my dogs were glad I was home. So I didn't have time to be too stressed with the podcast.
That's good.
Yeah, I was a little nervous, but I've enjoyed it. It's just been fun, and you got a good thing going. So I've enjoyed it.
Much.
I've really enjoyed it.
I'd like to double that. Yes. You guys have a great thing going here. Keep it up. I'm really.
Yep.
Thank you.
Well, we're coming up on our 1-year anniversary on July 1st, so we might have to start planning some big first anniversary spectacular. Ooh.
Ooh, we'll record this by candlelight.
Yes, that's right. In fact, let's go completely Oddfellow style on that. We'll record it on a wax cylinder,
There we go.
and then I will digitize it for distribution. Well, thank you to both of you for participating in this episode. You've shared just a huge amount of great and useful information. So on behalf of all of us here at the Three Links Oddcast, we want to thank both of you for what you've done, both in your jurisdiction and what you're going to be doing as we go forward and get our lodges moving and meeting again. Now, for our next episode, we've got something kind of unusual. Now, normally on the podcast, we talk to members about what they do. But on our next episode, we're going to talk to someone who is not a member, and we're going to find out why. So be sure and tune in to the next episode of the Three Links Oddcast. Thank you very much for listening. Bye-bye, everybody.